Hello and welcome to the 50-minute Matrix excerpt talking about stress relief by Brendan Vermeer. Enjoy.
That's a big one. I could definitely talk about that for hours, but usually what I try to, in a nutshell, tell my practitioner students, I say metabolic stress equals the sum of your emotional stress, structural stress, and biochemical stress. So that's my little equation.
So emotional, biochemical, and structural.
Yep.
Thinking about emotional stress, I'm sure that comes both from antecedents and triggers, as well as things that are mediators, things we're exposed to every single day.
Absolutely. I really think of that kind of psycho-emotional stress as the most obvious, but also one of the least catered to, like especially when I'm working with clients, they kind of get focused more on, well, fix my metabolism, but they're not thinking about fixing their psyche or their soul, and that's obviously a very big missing piece.
Absolutely. And so that really comes into the mind, spirit, and emotions, our relationships and networks,
Yep.
and what we're doing each and every day. Structural stress, it's really interesting to think about in terms of metabolism because we could have imbalances in our musculoskeletal system, but people could also be forcing their bodies into a metabolic stress state with what they're doing each and every day. Isn't that correct?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I started my career as a personal trainer and I'm a huge fitness guy. My girlfriend could speak to some of this a lot better. She's a neurokinetic therapy practitioner. So somebody has whiplash and that's causing all sorts of structural stress and driving inflammation. But I usually just use it doesn't have to be anything extreme, just thinking about the toll that your body takes through your daily exercise or activity, whatever that is, that's structurally producing inflammation and adding to that burden on the body.
Right. And there may be biochemical inabilities to repair from that structural stress, correct?
Exactly. Whether, of course, the genetics, epigenetics, and then, of course, all the more kind of hidden stressors and different infectious biochemical things that might be just adding to that and then hindering, their ability to recover.
Well, I kind of want to walk through what I call the soup of the matrix. That's the central area. And think about stress in each of those areas that would obviously fall mainly into the biochemical arena. What kind of stress do you see patients having in the GI area?
We can kind of talk about the end product of things like chronic inflammation or leaky gut, but really it's, well, what's driving all of that? Whether it's the toxins they're ingesting, inflammatory foods, and then that's not even mentioning all of course, the different infections or microbial overgrowth. So bacterial overgrowth, fungus, parasites, worms, viruses, you name it. So when you combine all of those types of microbial infections with the inflammatory foods and all the chemicals and medications too, of course, we just have a cocktail that just destroys our gut from the inside out.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Brendan. I always say eating is the biggest stress we put on our body every day, right? And there's huge stress that I think is overlooked from even the quote unquote healthiest of diets, especially if we don't have the right abilities to break down, digest, and absorb the foods we eat. And I see this a lot with people going on diets that aren't necessarily appropriate for where they are in their life or what their body is going through. Let's say they're eating too many fats and they have liver issues or small intestinal issues, or they're trying to intermittent fast and they have blood sugar issues. How do you see these manifest in people's lives where they're buying into dietary theories that are actually putting more stress on their body?
That brings up a really good point. I think I kind of live in my own little sciencey world, and sometimes I forget about that, where the general population, they're going to buy into whatever diet. Like right now, everybody's going keto.
Right.
But it's like, is that actually conducive for your physiology? And they're not basing that off any objective or even subjective. They're just like, oh, this will help me lose weight. Sure, let me drink olive oil all day and eat bacon and I'm going to lose weight. Meanwhile, they destroy their microbiome and clog up their liver or whatever the case is. So they really need to be basing their dietary choices off a little bit more scientific data.
And personal data, like you're saying, it might not be right for them in that moment just because it's the latest theory. So you talked about the GI beautifully, and you really mentioned the immune and inflammatory balance. How about the stress that comes from our environmental inputs? What kind of impact does that have on our biochemical metabolic stress levels?
I look at the chronic health epidemic that we're all in at the moment. I think there is not enough talk about the spiritual side because, as a lot of us people know, I mean, high cortisol will completely tank your immune system and lower secretory IgA and just kind of predispose you to those gut issues. But it's like literally your own emotions and your emotional state. So I think about being at dinner last night with some people that just kind of a negative vibe. And I really think negativity is toxic, both like literally and metaphorically. There's all sorts of external factors, both tangible and more emotional and energy wise, that will drive stress and all the inflammatory or biochemical imbalances that stress drives.
You said that so well, that negativity. And I think this is where we can get into a trap of thinking that something's good for us, like going out to dinner with friends or being with family, when in that moment or in that environment, it might not be stress-free. It might actually be having a whole biochemical impact on the physiological terrain. Take us into that sciencey part of your brain. I loved hearing you talk about cortisol and the impact on the inflammatory cytokines and the IgA antibodies. What else do you see biochemically happening in response to stress?
Essentially, we just see over and over where all these different stressors, the whole soup, really just start degrading the mucosal barrier. And it's always like chicken or the egg. Where did it start?
Right.
You know, it's like, oh, well, H. pylori caused low stomach acid, and that opened the door for SIBO and Candida, and that caused leaky gut, and that caused Hashimoto's. You just like domino effect,
Right.
da, 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 da. You know, so then it's like, well, you don't even have to figure out where it started. You just have to basically attack the whole system.
Yeah, that's so well said. I think this is where we really have to think about the terrain. And I have to say, all this talk about root cause resolution, I think, is setting up a scenario for patients where they think there's one root cause instead of looking at the multifactorial terrain that we have to address. And like you said, attack the whole system. I like to think of what we do in terms of healthcare through a three-tiered approach. And tier one are the non-negotiables. And stress and addressing stress and stressors to me is a non-negotiable. If we look at the right side of the functional nutrition matrix, what are some of your tactics for addressing stress and stressors?
It all starts with the brain. It all starts with the attitude and the mindset. And what people don't realize is you have control over your brain's network through neuroplasticity. We talk a lot about genetics and then, oh, well, you influence genetic expression environmentally through epigenetics. But it's the same thing with your brain, your thought patterns. You know, if you allow yourself to get stuck in that victim mentality and that negativity, yeah, of course, your brain is going to rewire itself through neuroplasticity to stay there. And so you really have to start from ground zero with looking in the mirror and looking within of like, what am I trying to do here? And what are the missing pieces that are holding me back from better quality of life?
I love this. I love that it's mind, body, and soul. And I think those are the non-negotiables. It's kind of like, how do we take diet and lifestyle modification onto our own mat, right? Instead of paying attention to everything else around us. Do you have favorite things that you do in your own personal life to mitigate the stress of being active and busy and building a business? I know many practitioners listening are in a similar situation.
I always tell my team, self-care first. If you're not taking care of yourself, you're not going to do good work or serve the world. So I live in a nice little man cave Zen apartment where it's just everything from essential oils pumping and plants to filter the air, my filtered water, my organic clean food. I mean, you name it, I've got it. I've got about the best self-care routine I've seen yet. That's what it takes to be able to perform at 100% all the time, or at least at your best all the time, whatever that is.
Yeah, that's resilience, right? If we go down to the skills section and look at stress and resilience, we can't necessarily control all the stress that we're going to be exposed to externally and internally. But what we can look at is what we do in the realm of resilience. I know I too have to have many practices, and I think we can all inspire our our clients and patients with the practices that we have in our own lives: forest bathing, meditation, yoga, and then, as you said, the clean environment that we set up for ourselves, both emotionally and in what we ingest, put on our bodies. All of those things are stressors. Like I said, stress is such a huge topic. So I'm just wondering, as you look at the functional nutrition matrix, does anything else pop out at you that you teach the clinicians that you speak to about stress?
I really like how you said it, and I was going to mention there really are the two terrains. There's the physical, literal terrain of your environment, but then there's the psycho-emotional terrain as well. And what I like to just kind of teach my clients and practitioners, because I think practitioners, they get a little bit too like nose in the textbook.
Totally.
They lose sight of the bigger picture because it's like, oh, I can map out the methylation cycle. And it's like, that's great, so can I, but why does that matter?
Right.
And how can I use that to better somebody's quality of life? And so I got this analogy from Dr. Jade Teta where you have to shape your path to be conducive to where you're trying to get. So it's kind of this analogy of an elephant rider. So the elephant is like your primal brain, kind of your ego, I would almost say. And then the rider of the elephant is your higher self, your kind of higher consciousness. And then, of course, you have the path that the elephant is walking down. So the trick is like, well, you've got to shape the path so that way it's easy for the elephant to get from point A to point B, but then you have to have the higher self guiding that elephant down that path. I think if you break down your life with that analogy, it's like, all right, we'll shape the path, control your primal brain through that higher consciousness, which means, yeah, you have to be doing the self-work, the journaling, the meditation, whatever spiritual kind of practice to be able to tap into that higher self.
Hope that gave you some valuable information in this podcast. Talk soon.